Evolution. It's how we became who we are today. But what about dragons? Did they evolve from somewhere too? Well, in this video, I'll explore this question and more. This question has interested me for a long time, so much so that during the 2025 Fenwing Fest, I actually asked Tui about it. She told me that there were 3 original tribes from which all the other tribes descended from. One of the tribes was the Skywings, but unfortunately, she wasn't able to remember the other 2, though I suspect one of the tribes may not have been an existing tribe, so she just didn't want to spoil us. Book 15 also confirmed that before the Scorching, there were no tribes, and dragons had a mix of all of the traits of the modern tribes. So at some point, presumably right after the Scorching, 3 dragon tribes emerged, and eventually evolved into all 9 tribes. Additionally, during the interview, the Tui confirmed that, due to their shared photosynthesis abilities, the Rainwings and Leafwings are related. With that out of the way, let's find out what tribes descended from where. Most dragons have a very defining characteristic: their ability to breathe fire. However, in Wings of Fire, some dragons can't breathe fire. I believe that you can divide the dragons based on whether or not they have the ability to breathe fire, with the fire-breathing dragons descending from the Skywings, and the non-fire-breathing dragons having a common ancestor that shares traits with all of the non-fire-breathing tribes. The Icewings are a tricky case, because they can breathe something, but that something isn't fire. I tentatively group these dragons with the fire-breathing clade, but it could go either way, honestly. Lastly, the Beetlewings have some pretty absurd differences compared to the other tribes, which I'll touch on later, so I believe that they are the final of the 3 original tribes. Now, let's take a closer look at the first grouping, descending from Skywings. The Skywing tribe is one of 3 original tribes, and the only one of the 3 to be confirmed by Tui. The Skywings probably emerged near the Claws of the Clouds mountains, before expanding into the other mountain ranges across Pyrea. Additionally, I believe that many of the tribes actually evolved from the Skywings, specifically the Mud, Ice, Sand, and Nightwings. Next, I'll go over exactly how they may have evolved, and what traits they may have had at each stage of the evolutionary process. First, we have the Sandwings. I believe that the Sandwings are a result of a Skywing migration into the desert. The migration probably began with a group of Skywings moving nearby the Great Five-Tailed River, before eventually adapting to the desert-like environment by developing traits such as reduced water consumption. These new traits let them spread further into the desert, and even into the Talon Peninsula. This Talon Peninsula population was cut off from the desert population due to the mountains, so they began to diverge. The desert-dwelling dragons developed poison barbed tails, while the Talon Peninsula population didn't. Additionally, due to no longer living in the desert, the Talon Peninsula population eventually developed darker scales and a nocturnal lifestyle, becoming Proto-Nightwings. The desert-dwelling population eventually became Proto-Sandwings, and then further developed into Sandwings. Next up, we have the Mudwings. Their story is much simpler. They are likely a result of Skywing population near the Diamond Spray Delta, adapting to the swampy environment through things like higher breath capacity and a more bulky body plan. This Skywing population eventually grew more numerous and expanded into the swamps further south, becoming the Mudwings. The last descendant of the Skywings are the Icewings. The Icewings are probably a result of Skywing migrations into the icy northern peninsula, with the Skywing population slowly going further north as they gained traits that made them more resilient to the harsh environment of the Arctic. I think the second of the original tribes was something similar to a leafwing, but with gills and venom. I'll call them proto-leafwings. Along the way, they lost their venom and gills, but they passed these on to some of their descendant species. They probably emerged near the base of the tail of the continent, near the border of the modern Mud and Sea kingdoms. From there, they migrated into the rainforest, but then, due to distance, some populations began to diverge. The starting population began to diverge into an aquatic lifestyle, retaining the gills and moving towards the Bay of Thousand Scales. The reason I think the sea wings are closely related to leafwings is due to their color similarity, both having webbing and similar body shapes. The middle population evolved color-changing scales and kept the venom, and the reason I think that the rainwings are related to leafwings is due to what I mentioned earlier, and the final population became the leafwings we know today. The final of the 3 tribes are probably the Beetlewings. They are by far the most different from the other tribes, as I mentioned earlier. They have a unique life cycle where they go through metamorphosis to grow wings, of which, unlike the other dragon tribes, they have 4 of. In real life, this is just absurd, as there are literally 0 cases in nature of a species having more limbs than an extremely close relative. Additionally, reptiles don't undergo metamorphosis at any stage of their life cycle, and even amphibians, the closest group of animals that do, don't have chrysalises or the like, and simply grow their limbs at some point during their lives. If I could, I'd say that the beetle wings weren't closely related to the other tribes, but unfortunately, something that doesn't let me do that. You see, Clearsight had dragonettes with the beetle wings, proving that the night wings, and by extension, the rest of the dragon tribes, are related closely enough to the beetle wings to reproduce. The beetle wings likely didn't migrate much, given that they didn't have any relatives on Pyrea. I think they probably merged wherever their kingdom was, and stayed there until they were banished from Pyrea and fled to Pantala. The problem with that theory is that, unfortunately, we don't know where the beetle wing kingdom was. The only information we have about it comes from Book 16, where it is stated that after the beetle wings fled Pyrea, their land was split between the rainwings and skywings. Given this information, I'd assume these emerged somewhere over here, and their greatest extent was something like this. However, we aren't done. The beetle wings are unique in the fact that we actually know what they evolved into, which are the silken hive wings. After Clearsight arrived in Pantala, the dragons she had dragonettes with eventually became the hive wing tribe, and the ones she didn't became the silkwings. Now that I'm done talking about it, let's see the final evolutionary tree. As you can see, the 3 original tribes are up here, followed by all of the other tribes down here. It even shows small connections, like Clearsight's dragonette's influence on the Pantalan tribes. Anyway, now that I've showed you that, that's all I'm going to do today. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell, and take care.